Welcome to this -1% Subnautica speedrun. Today we're going to write some code and inject it into Subnautica so that the game lets us finish early. So I've just created a new class library project using the C# programming language here in Visual Studio. And I'm going to write all of my code in this project and then inject it into Subnautica. So the first thing we need to do is add some references to Subnautica's DLLs so that we have access to their internal classes. So I'm just going to browse here, and I've already opened the Subnautica directory. So under the Subnautica directory, there's going to be a folder called Subnautica_data, and in there is going to be another folder called managed. From there, we need to take this assembly C#, first pass, and finally the Unity engine DLL, and we're going to add those dependencies and click OK. So now we have the dependencies. Next thing we're going to do is write a class which will serve as the entry point to our project. So I'm just going to call this class loader.cs. I'm going to first of all write a static, first I'm going to make this class static. I'm going to write a static void method called load, so this is going to be our entry point. And this method is basically going to create a game object which will serve to host all of our scripts. So I'm just going to call this hook target, and I'm just going to create a new instance of the game object. Next thing we need to do is ensure that Unity does not delete this object. So we're just going to type Unity engine.object.don't destroy and load hook target, and I actually don't need this this namespace here. So now we have our hook target, and the next thing we need to do is add a component to our hook target, which is going to be the hook. So this hook is actually going to be our script that does the rest of the hack. So because this is just our entry point class. Another thing I'm just going to quickly cover is that you can actually unload your scripts as well. So if you were testing the script, for example, you'd want an unload method so that you could disable your script temporarily. And the unload method will need to delete this object. So it's going to call object.destroy, and it's going to destroy our hook target. And this will automatically destroy all of the associated scripts. So I'm actually just going to create a private field, private game object field, and I'm just going to call it hook target. And our hook target is actually going to just be that field. And I forgot to make this static. And then now all of our methods have access to this hook target. So now that we've created the entry point, we need to create a hook script, which is going to be a mono behavior. So I'm just going to call the script hook and create it. It's going to inherit from mono behavior. And you can now see in the other class that the component is resolved. So in this hook, all we're going to actually do is on the awake method, we're just going to attach a UI element to the game. So I'm just going to call GameObject.addComponent, and then so our UI script is just going to be called mod menu, and it does not exist yet. So that's what we're going to create next. I'm going to create a namespace called user interface, and within that namespace I'm going to create a class called modMenu.cs. So this mod menu is also going to be a mono behavior, and we're of course going to use the onGUI event to create a UI for our mod menu. So I guess the first thing we've got to do is call GUI.box, and then this will create a background box for our UI. And you can see this box actually wants a rectangle, so I'm just going to create a field which represents the box rectangle. I'm just going to call this background rectangle. And I'm going to instantiate this. I'm just going to give it a margin from the left side of the screen of 50 pixels, and from the top as well. Width, I'm just going to go with 300, and for height, I might just go with 250. We'll see how that goes. So I'm just going to write this background rectangle here. And I'm also going to write some text, so this is going to be the title of our menu, so I'm just going to call it Aleksbgbg mod happy face. So next thing I need to do is create some buttons. So we're actually going to have 3 buttons. And I jumped the gun here, so first I'm going to write go.button. And this method actually returns a boolean, which tells you whether the button was pressed or not. So depending on whether the button was pressed, we're going to just have some other code take place. So that's the if statement. And I'm just going to create 3 of those. So we're just going to forget about the rectangle for the moment. We're going to write some text in this. So the first button, well, there's actually 3 components to, finishing the game. The first is to build a Neptune platform. So this button is going to build Neptune rocket platform. The next component to finishing the game is actually to build the rest of the rocket on the platform. And there's actually a consistent way to build all 4 pieces of the rocket, which is the gantry, the boosters, the fuel, and the cockpit. So I'm just going to create a button that does all of these. I'm going to label it with build next rocket piece. Actually, I should probably call it Neptune piece because the rocket is called the Neptune. And the final button we're going to have is going to disable the quarantine enforcement program. Disable quarantine enforcement program. And this is the virus that is actually preventing you from disabling the... Well, I mean, there's a gun which will shoot your rocket down if you leave the planet. And in order to disable the gun, you need to get rid of the virus you gain by coming on this planet. But we're going to skip all of that and just disable the gun directly. So those are the 3 actions we're going to take. Now, here we need to work out how to position our buttons in the UI. I'm just going to create a method for that, since all of those buttons are going to need a rectangle. This method is going to return a rectangle for the button, and I'm just going to call it produce next control rectangle. And within here we're going to do all of our calculations for controls in their rectangles. So first I'm going to create a field, and this is going to be called the current control rectangle. So this is going to be active whilst we're building controls, that meaning the buttons. So first of all, I'm going to assign the next control rectangle as the current control rectangle, and then I'm going to return it. However, in between here we need to change position of the control to put it in the right position. However, before that we just need to initialize this current control rectangle, so I'm going to create another method called initialize current control rectangle. And within that, all I'm going to do is, surprisingly enough, set the current control rectangle. So I'm just going to kind of expand this constructor here and make it prettier. So the first parameter of this rectangle is the X position of the rectangle. So this is going to be the same as the background rectangle plus some margin. And we're just going to create a constant for that margin. And I'm just going... No, I want a float. I'm just going to call this horizontal margin, and it's just going to be 5. So we'll just add the horizontal margin here. And then we need the Y position. This Y position is just going to be the background rectangle dot Y. And since there's actually a label on the background rectangle, which is the mod title, there's going to need to be a distance between the next control and the title. So I'm going to create another constant float called default control height, and each control is going to be 20 pixels high. And I'm also going to create another constant called inter-control distance. So this is going to be the distance between each control, surprisingly enough. It's going to be the same as the margin. So in order to initialize our current control rectangle, we need to start with the background rectangle, then add the height of the label, which is just going to be 20 pixels, and then add the inter-control distance because we want a slight distance between the label and the next control. And then we have the width of the current control. This is just going to be the same as the background rectangle minus twice the horizontal margin, once for each side. And finally, the height of the next control rectangle, or the current control rectangle. And each control is going to have the same height, which is just going to be actually default control height. And there's our current control rectangle. We're going to just define a constructor for this mod menu that initializes the current control rectangle once. And after each GUI call, we're also going to initialize the current control rectangle again to reset where the buttons were. And then we're going to position the next control slightly down by adding the default control height to the Y plus the inter-control distance, which is 25. And this will produce accurate rectangles. So produce next rectangle, and we're just going to duplicate this call several times. You could create a method for this, but no point, this is shortcode. So that's the mod menu done. The next thing we're going to need is the components of the mod. So the first component, there's actually just two components. The first component is going to be the kind of general mod manager, or mod action manager. So this will just manage all of the actions that the mod does. And of course I forgot the file extension, so I'm just going to delete that and create it again. Mod action manager.cs. So this is going to inherit from mono behavior. And now there's actually just three methods we need to define here. So the first is going to be, and if I just follow the labels on my buttons, the first is going to be build Neptune rocket platform. The second one is going to be to build next piece, so build next Neptune piece. And the final method is going to be disable quarantine enforcement program. And those are the only three methods we need. So the easiest one to implement actually is the last one, which is disabling the enforcement program, which is surprising because that's actually the longest part of the game. There's a static class in the Subnautica source code called story goal custom event handler, and this manages all of the goals in the story basically, including disabling the gun. This follows the singleton pattern, so it has a static instance called main, and then it actually has a method called disable gun, and it's actually that simple to disable the gun. The next, probably easiest part, is to build the Neptune platform. So the first thing we need to do is instantiate the Neptune platform. So I'm just going to call this Neptune rocket platform. This is the game object. And we're just going to call a helper method in the Subnautica source code called craftdata.instantiate from prefab. And we're just going to pass in the tech type that we want, and in this case we want the rocket base. And it's just that simple. And we're just going to position the platform underneath our feet. So the position is just going to be the main camera, which is, again, this follows a singleton pattern. And then we want it to transform, and then the position again. So it's just going to place it under our player's feet. And the most difficult part of this three-step process is to build the next Neptune piece, because we're going to call this method multiple times, once for each part of the rocket. So before we actually do that, I'm just going to create a separate class for this. I'm going to call this class Neptune Rocket Constructor, or something of the like. This is going to inherit from mono behavior again. And there's actually a class within the Subnautica source code that builds the rocket for us. It's actually called Rocket Constructor. So we're going to need an instance of that, and I'm just going to call this Rocket Constructor. And when the script awakes, we want to initialize this field. So I'm just going to add a Rocket Constructor component to this script. And then we just need to have a method which activates the next part of the rocket. So I'm just going to call this construct next Neptune rocket piece. And then this is going to call into the rocket constructor and call start rocket construction. And that's also that simple. There's actually one more thing we need to do, but that will come slightly later. So we need an instance of this Neptune rocket constructor. Oh, and actually I forgot, made a mistake here. We don't need to add this component because it will already exist once we build the Neptune platform, so we just need to find the object of type rocket constructor. So we're assuming that this script is going to be instantiated after the Neptune platform is built. So we're just going to name this field. We're going to call it Neptune rocket constructor. And if when we call the build next Neptune piece method, if the rocket constructor is null, we're just going to instantiate it by adding it to our game object, Neptune rocket constructor. And once we've done that, we're just going to call the construct next rocket piece method. And that's all of the code for the script or the mod. I'm just going to build it. There's one error here. We need to import this namespace, of course, and then I'm just going to build this. So there's actually one small detail I forgot. I forgot to actually call any of these methods in the mod action manager. So I'm just going to create an instance of this manager. So mod action manager. Just give it a name. And in the awake method, I'm just going to instantiate it. Mod action manager, and there we are. So in the onGUI method, the first option is to build the Neptune rocket platform, so I'm just going to call that method. Whoops. And then I'm going to call the next method here, so build next Neptune piece, and finally disable quarantine enforcement program. And there we built the mod in release mode. So before we actually mod the game, we just need to go into the source code and change one little part of it. So I'm just going to edit this assembly C# DLL. And I know there's a method in this DLL called consume resources. And this method is what actually checks if you have the resources required to build the rocket. And we don't want to deal with gathering those resources, so we're just going to return true here, indicating that we do in fact have the resources and they were taken away from our inventory when they actually weren't. And the compiler will optimize away the rest of this method, since control will always return at the first statement. And there it is, that's the entire method. And I'm just going to save this module. So this is going to overwrite the Subnautica source code with this changed method. And that's all of the source code modifications we need. So next we can just launch Subnautica. So now that Subnautica has launched, I'm just going to go into this commander window over here, and I'm going to invoke this command. So I already have an injector which will inject our DLL within the Subnautica executable. So all of the parameters I pass to this injector is the exe I want to inject into. In this case it's called subnautica.exe. The path to the DLL that I'm going to use, which is this path here. The namespace of the DLL, which is the Aleksbgbg.mod namespace. The class which will load the DLL, the entry point class, which is the loader, and the entry point method, which is the load method. So I'm just going to press enter, and we have injected, as you can see, within Subnautica. There's our mod menu. I'm not going to use any of those buttons yet, because we haven't actually started the game. If you wanted to unload the DLL, you could just type unload instead here at the end, and that will use the unload method, and you can see the mod menu is gone, so we're just going to load it again. And we're going to start the game. So we're just going to go on hardcode, because why not? And we're just going to wait for Subnautica to load. So Subnautica has loaded, and we're just going to press escape to skip the start, and we're just going to directly head into the world. So this seems like a deep starting point. In fact it is, it's right on the edge of the kelp forest.
Orbital hull failure. Cause unknown. 0 human life signs detected.
So I'm just going to go where it's slightly deeper over here, and I'm going to, and slightly away from the pod, and I'm just going to invoke the feedback menu. This will allow me to press buttons on my mod. So I'm just going to spawn that platform under my feet. And there is the platform. Slightly violent. And I'm just going to build the next piece, which is the gantry. You can see it started building, the builder bots have gone. And apparently we are constructing. So whilst waiting for that to take place, I'm just going to run over to the gantry and just invoke the elevator. You can actually start using these as soon as you started building them. I would make this stage quicker, but there's actually no way to disable the animations because they're internal to the engine, at least without spending another 5 years trying to figure everything out. So we're just going to wait. So we're done with that, and I'm just going to build the rocket boosters right there. And the builder bots go. So we'll just watch this for a bit. So for some reason the platform is actually spinning. I don't know why that is. It's probably because the ocean is quite shallow and it's getting heavier. Well, the platform I mean. So we're just going to build the fuel part of the rocket. And I think this is tipping over now, this platform. And if anything it's going to hit the life pod in a bit. So maybe we should get off the planet quicker. Or we just have to wait for those builder bots. And we can actually get in now. And we can start activating these levers. So I'm just going to activate the cockpit part, and I'm just going to activate all of these levers now.
Auxiliary power unit online. Pressurizing hydraulics. Communications systems array active.
So I think we're almost done now. How close is the life pod? I think we've crashed into it. So the rocket is done. We're just going to climb up here. So we're just going to activate the life support systems first.
Life support systems online.
And then the primary CPU. This rocket is really tilting.
Primary computer systems active.
In an adjective, not verb way. We're now going to use the time capsule. And we're going to try to launch, but we can't. Because of the quarantine enforcement platform. And I'm just going to disable that. And we can launch now. Unfortunately, we did not save the Aurora from its radiation leak, but we'll just leave that to one of those other survivors, supposedly. And we're just gonna get out of here. So I'm just gonna disable the mod and leave you with the ending of Subnautica.
2, 1. Time capsule jettisoned. Caution, approaching orbital debris field. Orbital debris field clear. Performing gravity turn maneuver. Confirm destination coordinates. Nearest interstellar phase gate. Engaging ion boosters in 3, 2, 1.
What is a wave without the ocean? A beginning without an end. They are different, but they go together. Now you go among the stars, and I fall among the sand. We are different, but we go together.